History often remembers wars as explosions, sudden, dramatic, unstoppable. But World War I didn't start with an explosion. It began with a whisper, a signature, and a promise written on fading paper, a treaty most people forgot even existed. Let's travel back to the late 1800s, a time when Europe was a chessboard and every major power was quietly moving its pieces. Britain ruled the seas. France was rebuilding its pride after defeat. Russia dreamed of expansion. And deep in the heart of Europe, a new power had risen, the German Empire. Germany was young, proud, and restless. It had just unified in 1871 after a lightning-fast victory over France. Its leader, Otto von Bismarck, known as the Iron Chancellor, wanted to secure his newborn empire by any means necessary. And so he began weaving a web of alliances, agreements meant to protect Germany from enemies, but that would one day entangle the whole continent in war. Bismarck understood that France wanted revenge. Losing the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine had been a national humiliation, so he looked east, toward Austria-Hungary and Russia, and tried to keep them both on his side. In 1873, Bismarck formed the Three Emperors League, an alliance between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. It was meant to maintain peace and balance, but the alliance was fragile. Austria and Russia both wanted control of the Balkans, a region of small nations with big tensions. Serbia, Bosnia, Bulgaria, names that would later echo through history. Each empire saw the Balkans as a gateway to power. The Three Emperors League collapsed, and Bismarck had to act fast. In 1879, he made a new deal, the dual alliance between Germany and Austria-Hungary. The terms were simple. If Russia attacked one, the other would come to its defense. 2 years later, Italy joined, forming the Triple Alliance. But Italy's loyalty was shaky. The real foundation remained Germany and Austria-Hungary, bound by that mutual defense treaty. It was meant as a shield, not a sword, but as history would show, shields can become weapons. Now, here's where the forgotten part comes in. In 1887, Bismarck did something clever and secret. He signed a hidden deal with Russia called the Reinsurance Treaty. Its purpose was simple, to prevent a two-front war. Germany promised to stay neutral if Russia was attacked by Austria-Hungary. Likewise, Russia would stay neutral if France attacked Germany. This meant Germany was tied to both Austria and Russia, two nations that hated each other. It was a diplomatic masterpiece, but also a ticking bomb. When Bismarck was dismissed from power in 1890 by Kaiser Wilhelm II, the young, impulsive emperor, everything changed. Wilhelm believed Germany didn't need complicated diplomacy. He wanted glory, colonies, and battleships. So he let the Reinsurance Treaty expire. That one forgotten document, unsigned, unrenewed, quietly dissolved the delicate balance that had kept Europe stable. Russia, feeling abandoned, turned toward France for support. In 1894, they signed a military alliance. 2 decades later, when war came, that forgotten treaty would haunt the world. By the early 1900s, Europe looked peaceful on the surface, but beneath it lay layers of resentment and fear. Germany and Austria-Hungary stood together. France and Russia had joined forces. Britain, worried about Germany's naval expansion, was growing closer to France. Each nation said its alliances were for protection, but protection from whom? Everyone was protecting themselves from everyone else. Bismarck once said, "The next great war will begin over some damned foolish thing in the Balkans." He was right, almost word for word. In 1914, that foolish thing happened in Sarajevo, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated by a Serbian nationalist. But here's what most people forget. The shot itself didn't make war inevitable.
The treaties did. When Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia for the killing, they expected support from Germany, and because of the dual alliance, Germany had no choice. Wilhelm II offered what history now calls the blank check, unconditional support for Austria's actions. Austria then issued an impossible ultimatum to Serbia, knowing that if Serbia refused, it would justify war. Serbia partially accepted, but not enough. Austria declared war. That should have been a local conflict, but treaties turned it global. Russia stepped in to defend Serbia, its Slavic ally. Germany declared war on Russia, honoring its alliance with Austria-Hungary. France, bound to Russia, mobilized next. Germany invaded Belgium to reach France faster, and that, in turn, brought Britain into the war. In less than a week, the web of promises Bismarck had woven and Wilhelm had carelessly untied pulled nearly every major power into the deadliest conflict the world had ever seen. And so, the forgotten reinsurance treaty, a small piece of paper meant to prevent war, became the ghost behind it. Its absence created a vacuum, and that vacuum filled with fear, pride, and misunderstanding. Bismarck once warned, "If ever there is another war in Europe, it will come out of some damned silly thing in the Balkans." He couldn't have known just how right he was. But perhaps, if that one treaty had been renewed, if Germany and Russia had remained neutral friends, the world might have been spared 4 years of trenches, poison gas, and millions of lives lost. In history, power often hides in silence, in what isn't said or what isn't signed. And sometimes, it's not the wars we remember that shape the world, but the promises we forget.
By the early 1900s, Europe had become a house of mirrors. Everyone watching, everyone preparing, everyone afraid. The leaders spoke of peace, but their armies told another story. Every treaty, every promise of protection had turned into a chain, one that would drag nations toward disaster. Let's rewind for a moment to understand how the absence of that single forgotten treaty created this atmosphere of fear. When Bismarck was dismissed in 1890, Germany lost more than a chancellor. It lost its balance. The reinsurance treaty had been the key to peace between Germany and Russia. Without it, Russia felt cornered. Austria-Hungary was a rival. Germany had turned its back, and Britain showed no interest in friendship. So Russia looked west. France, still humiliated from its 1871 defeat, welcomed the opportunity. In 1894, the two nations signed the Franco-Russian alliance, a direct response to Germany's arrogance. The message was clear. If Germany or Austria attacks one of us, both of us will fight back. This changed everything. Before that moment, Germany stood secure. Afterward, it was surrounded. France to the west, Russia to the east. The nightmare Bismarck had feared, a two-front war, had become possible. And it had all begun because one man decided not to renew an old promise. Kaiser Wilhelm II was not Bismarck. He wanted Germany to be powerful, admired, and feared. He wanted colonies like Britain and France. He wanted a navy that could rival the royal fleet. And most of all, he wanted to be seen as the central figure of Europe, the new Caesar. But ambition makes poor company for caution. In chasing glory, Wilhelm made enemies. His aggressive diplomacy, his loud speeches, his obsession with power, they all pushed other nations together. Britain, once isolated, grew worried. France, eager for revenge, built up its military. Russia expanded its army, and Germany, in turn, poured resources into its own weapons. What had once been a balance of power became an arms race. Between 1900 and 1914, Europe became a continent preparing for a war nobody truly wanted. Germany built massive artillery, rail systems for troop movement, and the world's second-largest navy. Britain, in response, launched its new battleship, the HMS Dreadnought, and started a naval race that drained both empires. France fortified its borders and expanded its alliances in Africa and Asia. Russia, though slower, began modernizing its army with French loans.
Every nation said the same thing. This is for protection. But protection, multiplied across continents, becomes paranoia. And paranoia needs only a spark. That spark was already smoldering in the Balkans. The Ottoman Empire, once powerful, was collapsing. Small nations were fighting for independence. Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, Greece. Each victory, each border change, pulled the great powers into the mess. Austria-Hungary feared losing its influence. Russia wanted to be the protector of the Slavs, especially Serbia. Germany supported Austria. France supported Russia. And Britain, though cautious, sided with France. Every conflict in the Balkans was like a rehearsal for something bigger. In 1908, Austria-Hungary officially annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, lands full of Slavic people who wanted to join Serbia. Russia protested, but Germany stood firm behind Austria. It was the first time the new alliances faced off, and though war was avoided, the message was clear. Next time, it might not end with words. By 1912, the region was boiling. 2 Balkan wars broke out, with small nations fighting to divide what was left of the Ottoman territories. Serbia doubled in size, which thrilled Russia, but terrified Austria-Hungary. In Vienna, military leaders started using a dangerous phrase: "We must strike Serbia before it's too late." And in Berlin, Kaiser Wilhelm agreed. He believed a strong war would restore German pride, test the army, and maybe even unify the nation. He said war would be short and sharp. He couldn't have been more wrong. Then came June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, visited Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. He came with his wife, Sophie, to show goodwill. But for Serbian nationalists, he symbolized occupation and oppression. A young man named Gavrilo Princip, part of a secret group called the Black Hand, pulled the trigger. 2 shots. One killed Sophie, the other Franz Ferdinand. The world froze. It was tragic, yes, but not unprecedented. Assassinations had happened before. The difference this time was the web of alliances, the chains of promises that left no room for patience. Austria blamed Serbia, and with Germany's full support, that blank check, it issued an ultimatum. Serbia must suppress anti-Austrian groups, dismiss certain officials, and allow Austrian agents to investigate within its borders. It was an impossible demand. Serbia agreed to most points, but rejected the one that compromised its sovereignty. Austria declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. From that moment, everything spiraled. Each treaty, written years before, came alive again, like ghosts awakened from the pages of forgotten agreements. Russia, protector of the Slavs, began to mobilize its army to defend Serbia. Germany, honoring its alliance with Austria, declared war on Russia on August 1st. 2 days later, Germany declared war on France, knowing the Franco-Russian alliance would bring them together. To invade France quickly, Germany crossed through Belgium,
violating its neutrality, a move guaranteed by Britain's Treaty of London in 1839. Britain declared war on Germany on August 4th. Within a week, all of Europe was engulfed. The very treaties meant to prevent war had made it inevitable. And what of the forgotten reinsurance treaty, the one that might have kept Germany and Russia friendly? It lay in archives, yellowed with age, unread and irrelevant. But its absence echoed louder than any cannon.
If Germany and Russia had still trusted each other, Russia might never have allied with France. Austria might not have dared to strike Serbia. The assassination might have remained a regional tragedy, not a world war. But diplomacy had turned into pride, and pride is a poor diplomat. In early August 1914, trains loaded with soldiers left for the front lines. Crowds cheered, flags waved. Newspapers promised a quick victory. Men believed they'd be home by Christmas. They didn't know they were marching into a new kind of war, one of trenches, gas, and machines that could kill thousands in minutes. They didn't know they were walking into history's deadliest storm. In less than 6 weeks, the careful balance of Europe, built over decades, had collapsed. And behind it all stood a forgotten document, unsigned and neglected. A treaty that might have kept peace, had anyone remembered it.
By August 1914, Europe was on fire. The trains had departed. The telegrams had been sent. What began as a local dispute in the Balkans had become a world war. The web of alliances, built over decades, had turned into a cage. And at the root of it all, hidden in dusty archives, lay a forgotten piece of paper, the Reinsurance Treaty. Its absence had created the fear that made these alliances possible, and now millions of lives would pay for that absence. At first, the war looked like a grand adventure. Crowds gathered in every major city, Berlin, Paris, London, Vienna, St. Petersburg, singing, waving flags, and believing it would all be over by Christmas. Men volunteered eagerly. They said it would be the war to end all wars. But the optimism didn't last long. By the end of 1914, the Western Front had frozen into trenches. Soldiers dug deep into the mud, facing each other across lines of barbed wire that stretched from the North Sea to Switzerland. Machine guns, artillery shells, and poison gas turned every battle into slaughter. For the first time, industrial power was being used not to build, but to destroy. And as each nation suffered, each blamed the other. Germany blamed Russia for mobilizing. Russia blamed Austria for provoking Serbia. Austria blamed Serbia for terrorism. And Britain blamed Germany for breaking its treaty with Belgium. The truth was simpler and sadder. Everyone had promised too much to too many for too long. 4 years passed. 10 million soldiers died. 21 million were wounded. Entire towns vanished. Whole generations disappeared into the mud of France, the forests of Poland, and the deserts of the Middle East. Each country had thought its alliances would keep it safe. Instead, those alliances had made war unstoppable. Germany fought for Austria because of the dual alliance. Russia fought for Serbia because of Slavic brotherhood and pride. France fought because of its promise to Russia. Britain fought because of its promise to Belgium. One treaty had linked to another until there was no escape.
And all because the one treaty that mattered, the reinsurance treaty between Germany and Russia, had been forgotten. By 1917, the war had drained the life out of Europe. Armies were starving. Economies were collapsing. Civilians were dying not only from bullets, but from hunger and disease. That year, Russia broke apart. The revolution overthrew the Tsar and brought the Bolsheviks to power. They signed peace with Germany, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and left the war. For a brief moment, Germany thought it could win, but the cost of victory had been too high. Millions of young men were gone. The German people were exhausted. And then, across the Atlantic, another power entered the war, the United States. The balance shifted. In November 1918, Germany finally surrendered. The war was over. But the peace that followed would only plant the seeds for another. In 1919, the leaders of the victorious nations gathered in France to write the terms of peace. They met in the Palace of Versailles, a symbol of France's past glory and now of Germany's humiliation. The Treaty of Versailles was not a peace treaty. It was punishment. Germany was forced to accept full responsibility for the war. It lost its colonies, its navy, its pride. It had to pay enormous reparations, debts so large that no country could truly afford them. The treaty carved new borders, created new nations, and destroyed empires. Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and the Russian Empire all collapsed. But in doing so, it also created resentment, chaos, and revenge. Among the ruins, a young German soldier named Adolf Hitler returned home, angry and humiliated. He believed Germany had been betrayed, not beaten. He called the Treaty of Versailles a shameful dagger in the back. And 20 years later, he would use that anger to start a second world war. All because one generation had failed to understand how promises, once broken, can echo across centuries. If the reinsurance treaty had been renewed in 1890, if Germany and Russia had remained friends, Europe might have remained at peace. Austria might have been restrained. France might have remained isolated. And the assassination of an archduke might have stayed just that, an assassination. But politics is fragile. A single decision, one signature, or the lack of it, can change everything. That's what makes the story of the Forgotten Treaty so haunting. It wasn't destroyed in war. It wasn't rejected by diplomats. It was simply not renewed. A single act of pride by a young emperor who believed he didn't need it. And that silence, that moment of inaction, became one of the deadliest choices in human history. After the war, Europe tried again to rebuild peace. New alliances were formed, new promises made. The League of Nations was created to prevent future wars, to replace secret treaties with open dialogue. But old habits die hard. Suspicion, fear, and ambition returned, like ghosts that refuse to rest. When Germany rose again under Hitler, the same pattern repeated. Alliances formed, promises were broken, and the world went to war once more. It took 2 world wars, tens of millions of deaths, and the near collapse of civilization before the world finally learned a fragile lesson. Peace doesn't last because of power. It lasts because of trust. Even today, in our modern world, treaties shape everything, from trade to defense to climate agreements. Nations still sign promises to protect each other, to share resources, to maintain peace. But the story of World War I reminds us that treaties are only as strong as the people who believe in them. Forget them, ignore them, and history begins again. Every war, in some way, begins with a forgotten promise. History is not made by bombs or battles alone. It's made by the quiet moments, the letters unsigned, the meetings canceled, the treaties left to gather dust. In 1887, one such treaty was left behind. It was meant to ensure peace between Germany and Russia, but when it vanished, it took Europe's balance with it. 27 years later, that silence became the sound of artillery fire. When we look back at the First World War, at the mud, the trenches, the barbed wire, it's easy to see chaos. But behind that chaos lies order. Behind every gunshot lies a decision. And behind this war lies one forgotten piece of paper. A treaty is only forgotten when we choose to forget what it meant. And peace, true peace, is not written in words, but remembered in deeds. So next time you hear about alliances, treaties, or promises between nations, remember this story. Because once a forgotten treaty started the greatest war the world had ever seen. And in that silence, millions paid the price.